The question is, are your hands better? Is your hand action better than let's say Liz Truss? Oh, that's anyone in the audience. Yeah. Oh yes, yes, yes.
Maybe I'll do that.
Malfunction.
Uh,
But Rishi Sunak had a malfunction. There was really weird, awkward pauses when he did his first speech.
yeah. Well, it's called artificial intelligence. But he's got a very good program.
And that's no different to I mean, Keir Starmer reminds me of that Transformer Soundwave superior.
But look, no. You've got to remember, Keir Starmer was programmed by Fatboy Slim. So, and
please tell me how that works. That is
well, they went to school with Andrew Sullivan. So there's a complete all three of them. And
wasn't Starmer a bit of a troublemaker at school?
I believe so. Yes.
Oh, gossip.
Fatboy Slim.
Welcome everybody to another Sunday Roast. We are surrounded by sensational guests today and quite a diverse range of views, to say the least, or maybe not. So I'd like to introduce you to Reem. Reem, can you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, so I'm a final year student at the London School of Economics and a political commentator and a Westminster frequent.
Tim, please introduce yourself.
Well, I'm reeling from Reem's biography, but a Westminster frequent is well, that's not like Matt Hancock now, is it? But
I hope not.
He's gone to the opposite side of the world.
he has indeed. It's like a scene from Aladdin. But on the subject of Aladdin, I feel I should be rubbing your lava lamp, Alex. In my guise as Robin Williams lookalike. You've never had a friend like me. Oh, so anyway, my name is Tim Wilson. I used to be a professor. Well, I still am a professor, I think, in a Moscow university. So I'm not going back there at the moment. And otherwise, I'm about to do panto, and I've got a YouTube channel which is under my name, which is Professor Tim Wilson. And with the thought of getting into panto, every other sentence is sort of loaded with innuendo, at least possibility.
Does it feel a bit like being in politics?
It feels like Matt Hancock, such a well-named man. Very lonely occupation.
You've said that twice now. That's definitely not going to be
only once on air.
Oh no, we've been recording since the beginning.
Oh, of course you have, because you're a wise journalist. So now we know all the dirty secrets.
And there's so much more to learn.
Oh, absolutely. But it's all about emotional intelligence. It's what people don't say which is important. And
it does seem to be a lack of empathy.
Well,
within the politics at the present, it's quite shocking. Before we go into that, Tim, I've got to introduce the co-host. No, it's fine.
Absolutely. We need to know who everyone is.
How can I follow on from that? So my name is Max. I run the Robespierre channel where I talk about British politics and Brexit in particular. And Alex, can you tell us about yourself?
Yeah, I'm a YouTuber, a lecturer, author, and my YouTube channel is Political X. So, what should we talk about first? Do we get into the seedy side of politics? Do we talk about corruption? You would like to talk about the seedy side of politics?
Well, I'd love to hear what Reem has to say about that, because she's deep inside it. Yes.
I wouldn't necessarily say I'm deep inside the seedy side. I think I'm just sort of an observer. Whenever I get invited to events, I just sort of observe the ongoings, and I think it's quite interesting. I think you'd think that as a woman, I would be one of the victims, so to speak, but I actually think that it's more dangerous for young men in conservative spaces. I've had friends who have been the victim of sort of Conor Burns' touching, and I've been to the Carlton Club quite a few times. I've never been harassed or sort of spoken to in that way, but I know that a lot of young men have been. So it's sort of it is sort of a cesspit, and I think it's partly probably because a lot of the young men don't feel as though they should come forward, especially in sort of conservative spaces, and especially when it's like a member of parliament that's the perpetrator. So there is sort of that side of it. There is also a lot of like hush hush, you know, secrets around Westminster and sort of gossip spreads. I remember because I was interning at a think tank in Westminster over the summer, and even just hearing news about like when the Queen passed away, we heard it like maybe 4 or 5 hours before the rest of the public did, and it's just things like that. I remember texting my family and saying, you know, oh my God, the Queen's passed away. They're like, no, she hasn't. And then 5 hours later, we found it on the news. So there is a lot of sort of like inside secrecy, and it is a huge bubble, and the bubble is very strong and hard to penetrate.
How are people different? So we the only interaction we have with politicians is really when they're interviewed on TV or when they're in the House of Commons. Like what's contrast, or have you seen any sort of contrast between what we see and what they are actually like? I mean, maybe Tim as well. You have some interactions with them as well.
You know, so when you're with them over a drink, or sort of, you know, so for example, with the charity that I volunteer with, we sort of invite members of Parliament to dinner and drinks and that sort of thing, and try to get them on board with the charity's cause. And in those settings, they're a lot more sort of loose-lipped. They will talk more. They will sort of be more comfortable and be more human. And I think one thing we have to remember is that a lot of the things they vote on, they don't know what they're voting on. They just sort of go with the party whip and, you know, get on with it. I remember we were speaking to a particular Conservative member of Parliament about the way he voted on the British Overseas Territories, because that's the charity I work with. And he said, what vote are you talking about? Like, we said, you voted with the government, or you voted against the government or with the government in this year. And he said, I have absolutely no recollection of that vote. You know, there are so many that go on. And so I think what's, you know, quite interesting is that a lot of the time they will just follow the party line, and that's sort of why these interest groups are incredibly important, because they make members of Parliament aware of these issues, and it means that they're actually able to advocate for them in the chamber.
Yeah, but it's not only that. You know, if you do a lot of speaking, you just say it, and you get on with the next thing, because you're trying to live like a cat. You're trying to live in the present tense rather than in the past or the future. And you find people coming up to you saying, oh, what did you mean by that? And you think, I have no idea what you're talking about. No idea at all. It's just gone. And I've lost interest in this. I mean, why are you talking about something I said? It's gone, done.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of politicians are like that. And there are some politicians who seem to have got a particular reputation in Parliament and in the news. And I know some of them, and I just think, well, but you're a lovey. And there's one person who's supposed to be my arch enemy, but I think he's charming.
Have you said that?
Of course not. He's my arch enemy. But
I think that's very true. I think a lot of them tend to be very charming as people, and it's probably how they got into politics. What I found interesting, so I am going to name this MP, Louis French, who I think is the most recently elected Conservative MP. And it was a Conservative women's organisation event, and I think it was one of the first he had spoken at publicly since being elected as a Member of Parliament. And he was so sort of incredibly nervous, and I thought it was really sweet. And I think it's, sometimes you forget that they are actually human. But I guess when they're voting on laws that maybe are quite harmful to people, then maybe it's very easy to forget that they are actually human beings, but actually often they don't know what they're voting on. They don't know what they're necessarily talking about. I think what's interesting is sort of the way that Parliament works. So you've got different drinks receptions, different speeches, and I think it's exactly what Tim said about, you know, they'll say things on a pedestal and then forget about it the next day, and you question them on it, they probably won't be able to give us an answer. And I think that, so, you know, the way Westminster works, you'll have these different drinks receptions, different events, different talks, where these members of Parliament will be invited to speak. Often they'll be told what to speak by either their staffers or by a chief whip or by the organisation. They'll be told what the right thing to say is, and they sort of probably have a handbook on things to say. And so actually when they're going to these speeches, they're probably going to one about animal welfare, the next one about education, you know, and it's all just completely random. And then, you know, they're not necessarily specialists. I think that's maybe an important thing. These members of Parliament aren't specialists in these topics. So I wouldn't necessarily take anything they have to say. I would take what they have to say as a pinch of salt.
But I think this goes right up to the top. I thought it was fascinating watching Suella Braverman in Parliament the other day, and there was a moment where I can't remember what's the name of the opposition Home Secretary.
Yvette Cooper.
Yvette Cooper, who's so brilliant. I have to say that, having forgotten her name. And
Brilliant one,
but,
yes. Who is she?
who is she? But what I found so extraordinary was that moment where she came in for the attack towards the end of her speech, and Suella Braverman started frowning and looking as if she was surprised. And I thought, how on earth can you do this? Because you must have been briefed that this was coming. You knew this was coming. And clearly the speech that Suella Braverman had given was completely rehearsed again and again and again. And the moment she strayed off her material,
lost it.
She lost, and she became really quite tyrannical and unpleasant because, I think she believes her own rhetoric, which is extraordinary. She's probably the only person in Parliament who does. And she's but that moment where she looked genuinely shocked that anybody would attack her personally, but her policies are monstrous, and I don't understand why she hasn't understood this.
That she's negotiated with Japan goes, I quote, above and beyond the EU-Japan deal, goes, I quote, further and faster than the EU-Japan deal, and delivers, I quote, additional economic benefits compared to EU-Japan. The impact of the UK-Japan deal, the forecast increase in UK exports to Japan was £2.6 billion. And the forecast increase in UK GDP was £1.5 billion. Now, let's compare those figures to her department's assessment for the long-term impact of the EU-Japan deal. Under that assessment, the forecast increase in UK exports to Japan was not £2.6 billion, but £4.3 billion. And the forecast increase in UK GDP was not £1.5 billion, but £2.6 billion.
So, I used to run a restaurant and cocktail bar, and that was in the city centre of London. And I noticed with the business execs, when they were all coming in, that there was an element of having to drink. Yeah. And it was part of the social structure, but also part of the promotion structure. So me being a evil entrepreneur came up with the ingenious, because a lot of the women were complaining like they couldn't keep up with the men. Yeah. And it was like, and that's not a stereotype, I'm just stating that that was a reoccurring thing. So we created our own cocktail for anyone that wanted it. And essentially it was putting water into a vodka martini glass and charging it the price of a vodka martini, which delighted a lot, especially a lot of the women who are working in the business sector. And it delighted us because we were charging 15 quid for a glass of water.
That's brilliant. Believe me, Alex, it would delight me. I'm a lightweight, and the thought of talking pints with Mr. Farage, which I quite like to do. I mean, I would only do it over a cup of tea, and
he gives that as an option. I've seen in some of his videos. That is a possibility. Tea over pints. So there is a way in. The point is, does that culture exist, Reem, in your experience within Westminster? If you don't drink, it's a little bit harder to get the greasy wheels moving.
It definitely is. I think if you're not willing to, I mean, so for me, as somebody that grew up in a Muslim family, being around lots and lots of alcohol all the time, constantly, is something I'm not very used to. So unless you are, and you can probably get away with not drinking, you will probably get a few weird stares. I remember somebody saying to me, I don't trust people who don't drink, who don't enjoy drink. I can't trust them.
It's about being clubbable, isn't it?
No, I was going to say it is a huge part of the culture. I don't necessarily know what it's like in the business side of things, but in Westminster, the drinking culture is crazy, really crazy. I mean, you wouldn't have a meeting without a drink. And you can get away with saying I'll just have a Diet Coke, because I often do, but I think it's sort of, you will get weird stares, and especially as a lot of like the smaller women who are definitely lightweight, it's just difficult to keep up with the men, and it's difficult. And obviously when you're trying to have these conversations, you don't want to come across as, well, a drunk.
Well, I think its culture is really dangerous, and there's always a suggestion that somebody who is poor on camera is perhaps the worse for wear.
Yeah.
And I
Naming no names.
Well, I wasn't going to talk about Nadine Dorries at all. You know,
I do feel it's a bit bad not bringing the Irishman in with the drinking.
what, from the distant past?
I
No, Max.
Max.
Max, right.
No, but I think you guys have really hit on something very interesting, because this idea that, you know, if you're not drinking, we don't trust you, because if we're all drinking, then there's a type of belief that, well, if I say something, well, it was just the drink talking. And if you're not drinking, then there's a risk that what I say will be, you know, passed on to others. So there's a sort of secret code that when whatever we say remains within the room because we're all drinking. I don't know if that's what the feeling is, but that's the impression I get.
But it's foolishness. A professional,
yeah,
a professional cannot drink and be coherent, and any actor knows this. If you one of the things I hate so much about reality TV is the way alcohol is poured liberally in order to make people garrulous. Actually, people are anyway. They just need the opportunity to speak. They don't need the alcohol. The alcohol tends to muddle things.
I love that. I think this is, you know, I think a really potent form of this sort of culture is found in Conservative Party conference. I mean, that's sort of where you get, you know, all the members of Parliament for the party, a lot of their staffers, a huge amount of journalists, huge amount of like young party members. So I went for the first time last year. And it is literally, you go from drinks reception to drinks reception to drinks reception to event, and then you go to the main hall, you hear the Prime Minister speak, you shake hands with the Education Secretary, you're all absolutely, you know, shit-faced. And, you know, they're all sort of going around, you know, just, you know, everyone's completely drunk and off their marbles. And then you go to the nightclub afterwards, and you know, I remember last year I was clubbing with Liz Truss on the dance floor. She was there till about maybe 1 a.m. And she was a very good dancer.
Oh, it's nice to know she can do something well.
She can do something well, yes. But it's just this bizarre thing at party conference, because obviously you're all in this secure zone, so everyone sort of knows that you can. It's a little bit more safe. You've got Owen Jones on the outside, desperately trying to get interviews with different people. I actually took an interview with him this year because I thought that it would be a fun challenge to be questioned by the one and only Owen Jones. But I think that it speaks to an interesting culture in Westminster, and that's sort of imported into a northern town. So last year it was Manchester, this year it was Birmingham, well, Midlands town, and it's just completely this sort of cesspit where you've got police outside guarding the doors. As soon as you walk inside, it's a hub of drunk conservatism.
I was just going to bring in, if you try to pull this level of drinking in America, you'd be sacked.
Yeah.
Which is really interesting, considering they're like, we've got that cousin sort of relationship with them. And the big difference for them is the fact they went through Prohibition, which did take a knock. Wasn't successful, but it knocked drinking back quite a bit. And it doesn't feel like that ever took place over here. And then I've often said with the Americans, though, they eat like we drink. We'll have a drink before we go out, but I don't think they even would go to the level of having a burger before going to McDonald's, which is interesting. Football culture in this country is very interesting as well. So there was a footballer called Yaya Toure who played for Manchester City, and he is Muslim. And what the Premier League used to do is give a bottle of champagne every month.
I don't drink because I'm Muslim, but not.
And it just had this big cultural shift inside the Premiership, where they were like, right, we actually can't give out champagne bottles as prizes anymore. We've actually got to adapt. But that was like, Yaya Toure was playing, 2012, 15, I think, for Man City. So that's almost a decade where the Premier League, which has a drinking culture, both with its fans and with probably the execs at the top, have moved on more than our government. It just then goes back to that thing of like, I feel this government is out of touch. And you mean, we brought up drinking. What do you think they were doing during the parties, like during COVID? They were going out telling everyone no parties and then toodling off and either drinking or, in some cases, like Matt Hancock, having an affair whilst telling everyone you're not meant to interact with one another, which is just like mind-blowing in terms of hypocrisy.
Well, he was eating out to help out, remember?
Oh God, that is horrible. Oh my God.
Okay, we can cut that.
There's a great show on the led by The Guardian on Anywhere But Westminster, where literally the bloke goes around interviewing people in the public and just asking questions like, what's it like being here? Or how are you finding this area? Or what's the town centre like now? Doesn't feel it's leading, but obviously you can do amazing stuff with editing. Can't we, Max?
No, I was gonna say you guys are the experts of editing out things, so maybe you'll know how people can edit things to make it seem a certain way or appear a certain way. I think it's interesting with sort of like prime ministers or politicians' interviews, how they're edited, and I think we've seen that Rishi Sunak's like campaign video or introductory video in his first week of being prime minister. It was just so I really dislike him as a person. I think he's incredibly arrogant.
Rishi Sunak.
Yeah, Rishi Sunak, and I think that video just made me dislike him even more. It was sort of like, I'm here to solve all your problems, and maybe that's just me as a libertarian saying, like, I want the government to stay out of our lives, not try and solve all our issues, because I think you're the people that are causing our issues. But actually, I just think that his arrogance frustrates me, and then that sort of media side and communication side of things. We think about the special advisors that politicians have. And they sort of communicate these ideas. I think that Liz Truss had a huge issue with communications.
That's the understatement of the century.
Alex, Liz Truss's problem with communications was called incompetence. It's quite simple, and I find Reem, when it comes to Rishi. I would much prefer to have that sort of slick, you would call it oleaginous, I suppose, that slick presentation, than to have the chaos of Liz Truss.
Do you genuinely think that Rishi Sunak's slick as being an orator?
Yeah, I think he's surprisingly good. I mean, his content is fairly modest, but his performance in terms of rhetoric in the last two PMQs has been remarkable. I've been really quite surprised. It's not
can I just come in there? Are you sure? Because at the last PMQs, the one was a couple of days ago.
Yeah,
he brought up Jeremy Corbyn, and he brought up Brexit.
And he brought up compassion.
He's stuck in 2019, and he's stuck in this sort of COVID lockdown era.
No. You're missing the point, Max. Max, it's not about the content; it's about the presentation. His presentation is slick.
Break it down. Like,
well, if
he's on stage,
example,
what is he doing that's so good?
It's sort of like the emotional intelligence. It's his body language, his control of his face, his smile, his disarming. He has no intention of answering the question.
His robotic features.
But no, you think he's robotic, but look at the whole movement. The whole movement, that little frame. It's sort of, it's like Tom Cruise without a script. And
Michael,
I actually, but I think you're onto something, because I keep hearing, if you didn't have the camera on, you would almost imagine it's Tony Blair talking.
You would,
because he's like but like a cheap copy, not
like a cheap copy.
Yeah.
And I think he's made Tony. I think he's made Tony Blair his idol in the same way.
As I stand here before number 10 Downing Street, I know the huge responsibility that is upon me and the great trust that the British people have placed. For 18 years, 18 long years, my party has been in opposition. It could only say it could not do.
I've just been to Buckingham Palace and accepted His Majesty the King's invitation to form a government in his name. It is only right to explain why I'm standing here as your new Prime Minister.
Idol, in the same way as Liz Truss tried to make Mrs. Thatcher as her idol. There was such a difference between Mrs. Thatcher and Liz Truss. For example, Mrs. Thatcher listened. But and Mrs. Thatcher took advice about appearance and about the Rishi Sunak. Rishi Sunak is all appearance, and he's one of the best at it. I think his content is pretty ropey. His consistency is pretty ropey.
But he's the polar opposite of Boris Johnson there.
Oh, utterly. Boris Johnson is a bright individual. The problem is Boris Johnson didn't take advice, I think. Boris Johnson thought he was clever enough to be his own man. And really, the last person who took consistent advice from other people and was clever probably was Thatcher.
Work with voters, because in 2019 you had a clown, basically a clown, won an 80-seat majority, and now you have somebody who, is like a marketing manager or something.
Well, your prejudicative language is very impressive. You're already controlling the way we go. What can I say to that? I can say Boris isn't a clown. Of course, he's a clown, but the clowning was part of his survival from an early age, I think, and the clowning masks this iron grip on his argument, and Boris knew exactly what he thought he was doing. I'm afraid he was going in the wrong direction in certain instances, and I think he thought that the content would be enough, and the presentation in today's age is probably more important than the content. And from that point of view, I think Rishi probably, if he were in power for a little longer, would survive and would turn things around. He doesn't have the time.
I think that's probably right, but I think that Johnson, whilst he was a clown, he was a charming clown.
Utterly.
People loved him, but it's also, I think, an important point to make is that we all, as the public, knew he was a liar before the election in 2019. And so actually anything that happened after 2019, anything during his premiership, anytime he was caught lying or caught in a lie, it was like, oh, well, that's our Boris,
Yes.
There was no sort of, Johnson is a really remarkable politician in that sense, because any other prime minister who is found, potentially with criminal charges, lying, misleading the House of Commons. This is really huge stuff. And this, a prime minister brought down by an affair. This man who has had multiple affairs in his life, has lied to the public multiple times, has an awful track record as a journalist.
I think it runs in the family, but he was brought up with this idea that I think truth and loyalty and fidelity do not matter. What matters is an idea, and his idea, putting forward his idea.
That's a great segue.
Sorry, are we going to talk about Eton?
Education.
Education, indeed.
Education. It's out of all the prime ministers we've had, I think it's 20 went to Eton. I think all of them, bar Major and Brown, I was going to say went to Oxford. So all of them, bar Major and Brown, went to Oxford.
Yeah.
Sorry, just to interrupt for a second. I love the idea that Jacob Rees-Mogg did not accept John Major as Prime Minister because he didn't go to private school.
Is that true?
As far as I know, I don't remember.
Rees-Mogg was very young then, of course. I remember Rees-Mogg when he came up to Oxford. He was a figure.
You were around in the 1800s.
In my Robin Williams incarnation, I've been around for thousands of years. You want a friend in me? You've got a friend in me.
Oh my!
I'm Donald Trump, and I don't endorse this video. You should not subscribe or like the Sunday Roast. Every time you like and subscribe, a little bit of my soul disappears.
I like to think of Matt Hancock. I don't like to think of Matt Hancock a lot. Matt Hancock, oddly, was my MP while I was in my last was my MP while I was in my last school. So I had this idea that Matt Hancock was constantly raiding the stationery cupboard and looking for. Oh, could I have
using his parkour skills?
Parkour! Extreme! Parkour!
One of my students, because I part-time teach the 11+.
Oh, do you?
Yes.
Me too. Isn't it a vile exam?
It is. I
You're very
teach
lucky.
around the sort of Buckinghamshire, Slough area.
Eton.
Yes. So around the Eton area, but a lot of them are I think what's interesting when it comes to education, because we've seen a huge shift, well, I guess a swerve in grammar school education policy, because under Liz Truss, she was sort of saying we're going to lift the ban on building new grammar schools. And I was all for it, because I think that grammar schools are a brilliant sort of way to increase school choice, so that parents and children have different choices when it comes to their education and what kind of education they would like their children to have. But also it means that teachers and parents have that sort of accountability where they're able to communicate. If you go to the school, like the school that I went to, a regular old state school, the parents tell the teachers, you know, my child isn't doing well in this, or I would like my child to do better in this, they can sort of try their best, but there's no incentive, there's no institutional incentive for them to try and make their children do better. But then obviously under Rishi Sunak, he's decided to U-turn on that completely, and grammar school is sort of back to the backbone of sort of government policy. So I think it's interesting how grammar schools as a whole they were once the forefront of education policy, and they're now completely in the backbone. And now we're seeing that, you know, schools are underfunded or lacking funding, and they're potentially trying to there was a council that said that they might consider making children go to school 4 days a week instead of 5. I mean, we've had these huge lockdowns, and I don't know if you've noticed it, Tim, but with my students, they've had the impact of COVID has been disastrous on them.
Oh gosh, but COVID particularly, they have no social skills. It was very obvious in the school I was last teaching in. The children who had been locked down during COVID now have no social, and so it's 3 years of children shouting across the classroom, and it's so difficult, even in good schools, to control that. And you have to have such classroom discipline in order to get through a lesson, or such charisma or whatever. I don't know. One of the things I like about the grammar school, but I don't think it's exclusive to the grammar school, I think it can be spread across our whole education system, is, you know, the quality of our education should be the way to deal with inequality. Yeah. But the problem is we often misinterpret that, and we think it's the quality of our teaching. It's the quality of our learning which needs to be measured, and we can't measure the quality of our learning simply through exams. We're over examining children on a very small range of skills, and we're not teaching children the sort of life skills that they need. So often when we're looking at children, let's say in some of the public schools, though there's a certain amount of work that has to be done there, or when we're looking at children in the grammar schools, we can assume that in terms of that sort of social engineering, as a teacher, we're not necessarily replacing the parenting skills. Often the teacher is like an alternative parent and has a huge amount of parenting.
Legally, we are. Legally,
you're in loco parentis, and so we have a huge responsibility. But I think education is a way to deal with inequality, but we're not doing it because we're focused. Because so many teachers, well, the majority of teachers and the majority of schools are focused on teaching, not on learning. We talk about learning, and all these things in classroom methodology is all about what have you learned today, but in fact it's what have you learned from me, not what skills have you as a student acquired. And so when we very often, I mean, I used to teach teachers how to teach, and I was fascinated by this question between a closed question and an open question. If you ask a closed question, you're expecting just one answer, and the student is either right or wrong. But most of the time in British schools particularly, and schools which have been heavily influenced by Vygotsky or Piaget and this experiential learning, and my university had a big picture of Vygotsky on the outside of the building. It was very Soviet, and he taught there, so I felt, you know, I have to be in his camp. But we ask open questions and we expect a closed answer, and we keep asking the open questions until we get the answer we're looking for. We need, as teachers, we need to be ready for whatever answer we're given, rather like if we're a stand-up comedian, and we need to be able to turn that around and throw it back at the student and get the student to be more open and to be more confident with what they're doing. That's the basic skill.
Tim, is that a critique of the Socratic method then? because
well,
Socrates
no.
claimed-
The Socratic method is exactly that. Socrates deals with. Well, yeah, you're right. Socrates.
Yeah, he's a
Socrates,
midwife.
as in Plato, keeps asking
As in
until he
Plato,
gets
yeah.
until
But
he
he's
gets the
always said
question
he
what
was
he
a
wants.
midwife, which is
Yeah.
interesting because his mother was a midwife.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is also interesting in Athenian society, but that's also another point. But then I'm a big proponent of the open-ended questions and open-ended answers. But then you've also got to go, are we leading them somewhere, or are we giving them time just to think? So I ran philosophy classes based on Socrates' teachings.
Did you really?
So it would, I just throw students the question of define beauty or define good. That was our first lesson every year.
Yeah.
Give me a definition of good.
The good.
You can't. There's no. It's totally subjective.
Well, are
you about to?
I didn't realize we were going down here, but I'm always very excited by the Parmenides and the fact that and the fact that Socrates visits Parmenides. Of course, that could never happen. Parmenides died long before that, and he asks I think Parmenides asks, "Is there a perfect bad?" And I think the Greek he uses there is kaka. So it's really like. Do you remember that woman who used to do "You Are What You Eat"? I can't. Gillian somebody or other. Not the new education minister.
Her diet is absolutely horrific. It shocked me. Even me, it shocked me.
But she used to have the perfect poo above her door, and so Parmenides is saying, is it possible to have the perfect evil? And it's not answered. And so could you have the good evil? So the good infects everything. Everything can be good.
Well, he did have an answer for what good was, which is interesting. Yeah, the philosopher did have a. You dug around. It was truth. Truth is a great good. So then you go, how do you? But yeah, then what he also said in a little caveat to that was, you have to try and get to the good. You might not always make it, and you might be wrong. But then you've got to go back and then re-examine everything. So there's an element of like, there's a escape route for claiming that you've got the truth, because he would always say he didn't know anything.
I think this is where you would interface biblical criticism with Plato, because if you, I can't remember whether it's Matthew 7 and Luke something or other. You've got Christ saying, "Be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect," and then in the other one, "No one is perfect but God alone." So if you marry those two, you've got the idea that your goal is perfection, and you recognize you're going to fail. I think there are many truths, and the fact is we are searching for truth. We shouldn't stop that journey. But we're not necessarily going to get there, and we cannot hold the truth. It's too big.
So it's the opposite of what Plato said in the Republic about sort of the forms and the perfect forms. I mean, if there is a singular perfect form of anything, a perfect chair, a perfect lip gloss, a perfect anything, then we are continuously trying to search for that perfect form. But I don't think that's necessarily
once you get it, it's gone. I mean that goes back to one of Plato's sort of inspirations, which is Heraclitus, and Heraclitus as understood by Pocahontas. Do you remember in the beginning of Pocahontas, and she's about to get in her canoe, and she says, "The strange thing is about rivers, you can't step in the same river twice. The river's always changing." And then she goes, "Once around the river bend." She's quoting Heraclitus. You can't step in the same river twice. Always changing. And I think Disney is a much better teacher of philosophy than I am. And,
what if I said to you within football, there's an element of that? So a lot of people said that the Barcelona team were perfect because they kept winning everything. And there's a really interesting quote from a number of football coaches, including Pep Guardiola, or you could go to America and Vince Lombardi. Your aim isn't to reach perfection. It is the sustained effort to find perfection. Absolutely. And I've always said that there were moments of perfection within that football team, which is very hard to deny due to the success that they had. And I find football a very interesting analogy towards life and capitalism, because football is brutal capitalism in many ways at its greatest and worst. So you can definitely make the comparisons between the two, but it's interesting to see that the coaches are literally saying that's our standard. We are aiming for perfection in everything you do. And when you watch football, one mistake in 90 minutes will cost you a game. One mistake, one not looking over your shoulder, one wrong step to the right, left, 1 second too late, 1 second too early. There's an element of seeking perfection when you're playing at that top level to win. There's a luck as well, which we could talk about, but we were talking about education.
No, can I just pick up on this, because I want to ask Reem something, because she has the inner eye, I wonder. So, is it possible, this idea of the impossibility of reaching perfection, that this is why we seem to only have parties in power for a maximum of about 10 years before they disintegrate? In contrast, we've got other countries like Albania, where Edi Rama is successfully in power for three consecutive premierships, and of course now criticizing Suella Braverman directly.
It came a point where it was impossible to not react, because it was really an embarrassment for our civilization to hear all kind of crazy words being thrown in the air like normality, and invasion was the peak.
Having offered to help, and Suella Braverman, she can't resist her rhetoric. She basically slapped him in the face.
Yeah, I think our current political system isn't necessarily great for finding our philosopher kings. I think that we're far from that. But I think that, you know, this is a wider issue with government in general, right? Because, you know, the democratic system that we have at the moment means that whatever the government sort of, I mean, it's sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy in terms of the way that government policy is based on opinion polls, but opinion polls are based on sort of the media and journalism and whatever the government is saying themselves. So it is sort of a self-fulfilling thing where the opinion polls reinforce whatever government policy is, without having this sort of clear direction. I think that, so Liz Truss is a good example of this. I supported her in the leadership election. I hold my hands up. I supported
Reem. And just when and I thought we were going to correspond for the rest of our life.
I'm sorry. You can blame it on my young naivety.
No, naivety can be forgiven, but we will have to have some serious talks.
Okay, I look forward to that too. But I think
but you're right. If it was a choice between no content and all posture, Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak, it was like being caught between Scylla and Charybdis to keep up the classical illusions.
Can I just ask just something that just flicked in my mind about what you were saying earlier about perfection? What would be the perfect society, and could we actually ever achieve it? Because perfection is subjective.
I'm pretty ideological in my libertarianism. I think that maybe I sort of believe in a small state and free markets, and when we're talking about education, for example, I'm pretty pro-choice, and I think that we should have a free market education system in terms of voucher systems where we hand the power back to the people and hand the power back to parents.
No, hand the power back to the students.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, but also that's partly the parents, right? The parents have a huge say in their children's education, or guardians.
But what do we do with parents who don't care?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's also a problem, no?
The students always know, and one of the questions that I always ask students when they're trying to decide which A levels to do or which university to do, I say, well, have you thought what you enjoy? And so often they've stopped thinking about that. They're listening to what their parents are advising. They're listening to what they're told to be useful for a job. It's all about utility, and it's all about sort of social engineering. And they've forgotten what they enjoy, and then they end up choosing something which they have no interest in, and they're miserable.
Sorry, I just say with A levels, they are so tough and so demanding. I mean, I chose what I enjoyed, and I think that's probably why my 2 years of sixth form weren't hell. I actually kind of enjoyed studying my A levels, weirdly enough. I did English literature, history, and politics, and
how wise.
I remember in literature we were studying Khaled Hosseini and sort of looking at political protest. literature. And at university, one of my courses that I took as an outside module, because my degree is in politics and history, one of the outside modules I did was comparative literature in the 20th century. So we looked at all these Russian authors and so both sides of the Iron Curtain. And I think it's looking at literature as sort of historical text. Literature is so, you cannot remove it from its historical context, and it tells so much about the history. And I think it's like, Tim, you're exactly right, the education system that doesn't necessarily push students to pursue what they enjoy and actually then pursue the sort of, be the best of the best in those fields. Instead, we're sort of told, I mean, especially at the sort of school that I went to, we were sort of told we need to make sure we're focusing on our career and getting a good job and being able to have that sort of financial stability. But just very quickly, I think that the biggest difference between private schools and state schools that I noticed, at least when I went to, when I'm at university, especially my first year of university, I remember saying to my dad, everybody speaks Latin. Why wasn't I never taught Latin? And I think it's sort of part of this, I remember them sending like Latin memes, and I was like, I don't understand this. I was taught to do my exams, do my A-levels, and that was it. And I think it's partly this sort of cultural capital that you gain in private schools, the sort of learning how to make connections, learning networking, learning all of these different things that you just don't know when I get to university. So my first year was a huge culture shock, because the majority of students at these universities, LSE is not included in that, did go to private schools, not in international private schools as well. So they had all of these sort of literature references and had read things that I had never even heard of, and so it was a huge sort of difference. I think that is a big difference between a private education and a state.
We just need to encourage independence, and I think if we gave students a lot more control in their education, so they can choose their subjects, they can see what subjects are being taught and how they're being taught, they can choose with their feet. We're in a position now where we're in a very strange position. We've already trialed online teaching, and it's actually worked quite well, and yet we've gone back to classroom teaching, and I've gone back into a school where I've observed other teachers, and I've observed the control structure, which is appalling, and it's all based really on bullying. And then they say we have a no toleration of bullying. But anyway, the idea is teachers are coming in, and in their arrogance they think they are the fount of information, whereas the students can actually log onto the internet and they can find the information and better information so much more quickly. So we need to rethink what our teachers in classrooms are doing. And I think our teachers in classrooms need to become mentors, guide, resource suppliers, rather than the focus of information, rather than the source of information, because students can get that better elsewhere. And that way, maybe we can direct students, oh, you want to do this, you want to do this. Okay, fine. This is a school. We're broad enough. We've got the broad enough shoulders to do that. But it goes back to this idea of open questions. And I think teachers are so terrified of being moved off their track.
That reflects the system. Conformity, a factory of conformity.
It's like
it's why you end up wearing uniforms. I've got a question then for all of you. How many teachers would you say inspired you within education? If you would all look back and look at your entire education period from up to the age of 18, university, let's say university if you went there. How many teachers?
Shall we go round?
Yeah. So I'm going to, because Max has been a bit quiet.
Max.
Max, how many teachers? Because I would say, I've got a number, and I'll bring it up in a minute, but I want to hear what everyone says. How many teachers, and it's a key word, inspired you within learning or within their education field?
Probably 2 or 3. There was one particular teacher I had in high school who he was always asking us to try and dig a bit deeper. So what's the meaning of this? So we'd read a piece and he'd ask us, okay, let's dig a bit deeper. While, in other subjects, it was very systematic. It was just, okay, this is what we have to do. We have to achieve this goal. This is the exam. We have to pass this exam. But this was our English teacher. So he was really into, let's analyze, but also what does it mean for you? That was somebody who was inspiring. And then there was another teacher as well I had at high school. It was what we'd actually get to do is we'd actually ask him about, he was a child of the 60s, and we'd actually just ask him questions about the 60s, and he'd go on for about 20 minutes, like sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and that was so fascinating for us, country people in Ireland in the 1990s. So this was it opened up a whole new world for us. So he in a sort of accidental way, he was inspiring.
Oh wow! So you would say about 3?
Yeah, very few people.
Yeah, I would say for me it was primarily at my sixth form. I had like 2 or 3 teachers that were so incredibly inspiring. I remember, that's when I sort of started getting into politics, and my English teacher, his name was Mark. In my sixth form we actually used their first names in sixth form. I think it was more sort of free, and we also were given the choice to sort of use our free time however we wanted. We didn't actually have to be on campus on the sixth form college unless we had lessons, so it was sort of completely free. And this English teacher sort of spent so much time going through my essays and trying to help me improve them, and I think he really believed in me. And I remember saying something about Thatcher, and after the lesson he said, and he's northern, so he was like, Reem, do you really like Thatcher? And he was just he was like, really? But he was, I think him and my history teacher, Dan, at A-level as well, they're both just so incredibly inspiring in terms of, I think they just genuinely showed me they believed that I could do well, and pushed me to do that. I think other than those 2, I mean, most of my
2?
Yeah, 2.
Can I just bring in just for a second my wife? Her inspiration was her Latin teacher, who believed he was the reincarnation of D'Annunzio. Tim?
Yeah, I've really only got I've got 2 positives. I've got 3 positives and 2 negatives.
Ooh.
So they actually de-inspired you. They put you off learning.
No, quite the opposite. Quite the opposite. It was like the line in Torch Song Trilogy. Harvey Fierstein says something like, "I just think what my mother would do, and then do the opposite." But the 2 who were negative, there was a Latin teacher who was Irish, and he was only about so high. He was like a sort of vicious leprechaun, and he made us cry. But he was ruthless, and I had an art teacher at prep school, and he turned up at my subsequent school. I was blessed by God, and he was vicious, and he bullied me from day one, really, because I was quite sort of I was quite gifted artistically, and it's the reason I never did art at university.
Wow!
And he also made me cry regularly, and he would ridicule me in class. I want you to draw a picture of the boy sitting opposite you, and what are you doing, cherub? And I'd say, I've just finished it. I didn't tell you to start. Oh, I don't want something slick like this, blah blah blah. And he'd rip up my work and so on. But I define myself really by my art. I think that's the way I define myself now. In spite of him. So those 2 who, and I love Latin and Greek, and in a way I'm grateful to Brian Galway, but he was a shit, and he just enjoyed hurting little children. But the 3 who really inspired me, there was a wonderful history teacher who was barely coherent, and he I think he was ultimately German, and he had an incredibly thick accent, and then he had cancer and had half his jaw removed and continued teaching, and he was just dedicated, and I loved his enthusiasm. And sometimes when I jump in a waste paper bin and pretend to be Julius Caesar, I realize I'm literally copying him, and breaking into other languages in the middle of a class. That's what he did, and I remember him leaping on a desk during a history class and imitating Hitler in German. And it was, he brought things to life. I mean, he was an acquired taste. Some people loathed him because he was so chaotic. And in contrast to him, there was we had a priest who used to be the headmaster, and he taught English, and he was sort of, he showed no emotion. He was just utterly prepared for everything. He spoke in a monotone, and he always had lots of books around him. He walked around like a Dalek in a cassock. You couldn't see the feet moving. It was quite extreme, like one of those Russian dancers. But again, he taught me how to be thorough. So Doc Orton taught me all about the enthusiasm, and this priest Jack Morris taught me all about doing the hard work. And then I got to Oxford, and I met a wonderful man called Bishop Callistos, who died earlier this year. And I realized I picked up a lot of his vocal inflections as well as his beard. And so if you're going to have all that enthusiasm of leaping on the desk, you have to have the center of control and that backbone of organization. And I've taken that with me for the rest of my life. And then the other person who inspired me was a wonderful animator who I wrote to when I was 11 years old. And I think when you're a small child, write to your heroes, because they write back. And this man said, "Come to my studio, come and have it." And we remained friends until he died. And again, he was somebody he was just a hard worker.
Do you know what so I'm going to look at Finland. They're considered the #1 in education. And I'm going to have to disagree with you, Reem. This is the first time we get to do this and clash with this at the end. I don't think it is about choice. I think it's about standards. And you look over in Finland, there's no sort of you pick and choose. It's like all schools are good. That's what the Finns would say. That's what the teaching faculty would generally say from everything that I've researched. Do you know why we have grades A to F? Do you know why that comes from? This is the education system that's set up from the United States. It's meat. The guy who created the education system in the United States took a lot of industrial processes and then implemented it across the states, which ended up over here. So you get grade A meat all the way down. That's how you get that. That's why we've got that grading system. Do you know what the average, so statistically, do you know what do you know? Yeah, no, it's nuts, isn't it?
Come on.
He was put in charge of the education system for over 10, 12 years, and then was sacked after he said, our education system is incorrect. It should not be designed like this. And the American government sacked him from cabinet at the time. The average class size that shows that you're going to benefit, 19 is the average. Do you know what the average is for primary schools in the UK this year?
30. Isn't it 30?
Yeah. And Labour have said, we won't have more than 30 in a class, as if this is like an achievement. No, you've got to drop it down to 19. In the States, the average is between 16 if you're in private, and I think, 12 if you're in private, 16 if you're in state per class. And it's like, we've got to step up. The other thing is that's quite good. I'd be curious to know, if you learn a language, that benefits you. That's proven statistically. And
because you're thinking it, you're thinking conceptually rather than in a sort of monoglot way.
But I don't think we really encourage that. Does everyone here speak more than one language?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Somewhat do.
Well, I don't know what language I speak anymore, but yeah, I've got a couple.
Go on, Reem. What's the other language you got, Reem?
So I can read Arabic and I can understand it sometimes. But in school I learned Spanish. I did Spanish GCSE. I didn't do very well at it. But they did encourage everyone to do a language, but it was more so the top sets that were encouraged to take on a language as part of the English baccalaureate, which ended up being scrapped anyway. So it's all a mess.
but it's so difficult learning a language if you're not in the country.
But then Finland, it's standard to have 2 to 3. Netherlands standard 2 to 3 languages.
Estonia is the other place.
Yeah,
which is leading the way in education. Yeah.
So then the other things, and I'm really going to finish this off. Get rid of homework. Why are we getting kids to do 40 hours? Yes. Why are we doing 40 hours of learning and then going over the EU regulations that bans 40 hours of work? Yep. You don't do that in the workplace, but we do it with kids.
Exactly. You don't expect to bring your car back to your home to finish doing the wheel work when you finish making your car. Yeah. You don't do it.
And then the final thing, which I thought was quite interesting, inspiring them. I don't think we do that enough. I think when the majority of kids that when they leave school, they finish their A-levels or they finish university, education, done.
This is Principal Skinner. I trust you all remembered to bring in your implements of destruction. Now let's trash this dump.
We failed. If that's what we're pumping out as an ethos, we failed. And I think there's this element within schools and the government of wanting conformity. And yet and I'll end on this note, Western democracy is in part, or owes a huge debt towards like Greek philosophy of questioning. And I don't think, as you've all said today, I don't think we encourage that within our school system. And it's more about conformity than it is about the core foundation of Western philosophy, which is question and don't just accept what someone said. And that's why I don't think we teach politics and I don't think we teach philosophy in school. Anyway.
What is the time?
Well, it should be ideal for me. It's Dick Whittington.
Oh, that's amazing.
You know, and I don't even get a decent innuendo line. You know, I should be
unfortunate.
I'm the old man. I should be the person who's walking around the stage saying, "Oh, I've been walking all over London and not a sign of Dick." I'm going to do some ventriloquism with President Putin.
You're going to put his...
Oh my God, that's brilliant.
Be careful where you go with that.
He's going to sit on my knee.
And you're going to have your hand inside him.
I am. Yeah. Absolutely. It's a Julian Clary moment.
And any gaps or ums, ers, ars.
Oh, do you know that is quite rude in Turkish?
Ooh, what is it? Oh, do I want to know what it means?
Well, it's not masculine.
Okay.
So
it comes quite close to the to number 11 Downing Street, but sorry. Very rude, isn't it? But I keep doing Turkish news programs, and my partner, who is Turkish, sits on the sofa with his head in his hands. Because I keep going
Sort of political commentary for Talk TV and GB News.
Do you really?
Yeah.
Oh, wonderful! I haven't seen this. Gosh! But I try to keep away from Talk TV.
I'm afraid your view of me might plummet slightly.
Not remote. Look, they Talk TV. I think no, it was GB News got hold of me early on, and then nothing happened. So do sing my name to them. I will. I'm perfectly game.
They would love to have Tim on.
But they don't want me. They don't want me. I'm there. I'm like a prostitute hanging on the gate saying, "Have me." I need life beyond Panto, and I'm not going to go into I'm a Celebrity.
You want me to, though.
Matt Hancock is summed up by his name, and it's a very lonely occupation.
She's, I think, and this is not confirmed, I think having an affair with Nigel Farage, because I was on Nigel Farage's show last Thursday, and we were all just getting very drunk afterwards. He bought me loads of gin and tonics, and I kind of hated Farage beforehand, and I met him, and I was like,
he's a charmer.
Hate your politics, but oh my God, you're so charming. And I was talking about his relationship with Rachel, and he was like, oh yes, I was with her last week, and she said, and I said to her, we can't be seen in public and all this stuff, and I was like, okay.
Could you go to bed with a Remainer? Could you make her see the light?
Do you know what? I'm not going to answer that. I'm not going to answer that.
And
oh my God, we got world exclusive.
I don't think so. Where Rachel is now, Nadine Dorries was last week, and I think it's a little circle, really. Frankly,
normally is when it comes to politics, historically speaking, that like you can't really trust anyone outside your circle. No different with celebrities.
Well, Nadine seems to have a finger in everything. Oh, that's not.
That is an image that I won't get out of my head for the rest of the day. Thank you. Oh, please do the rest of the rendition.
I can't. I've got a frog in my throat. That's something Matt Hancock's going to have to get used to. Oh, Gina. He was considered a bit of a naughty boy, and he came to me in the playground one day. And he said to me, "Oh, sir, what sort of car do you have?" And I said, "Well, I don't have a car." "Oh no, you go by sleigh." And I just thought, what a wonderful thing to say. And I went back to the staff and I told everybody with great pleasure. And they said, "Oh, he should be punished." And I thought, you've missed the point. This is cleverness.
Hilarious.
Because he would never have intended the Santa joke, and after that they called me Prof Santa, which I rather enjoyed.
It's quite a nice thing to say, isn't it?
It's a nice thing.
It's like his total positivity as a character.
Yeah, and then after I left, there was knife crime in that school, so I thought I got out just in time. Yep.
Anyway, on that cheerful note, bye everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.